The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community, as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us to another edition of Insights. I'm joined by Jesse Osmer. He's the 1st Congressional District Republican Committee Chairman. Jesse, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So Election Day was a few days ago. Obviously a big day for the Republican Party, locally and nationally. So how long do people like you, who's campaigning for everyone around the community, basically, how long do you prepare for an election like 2016?
We'll start again in about a week, so it's immediate. The whole point of campaigning is to make sure that individuals understand the policies, understand the message that our party is carrying, and that takes constant contact with voters, and especially individuals who in their day-to-day lives may lose track of what's going on nationally or locally. Most hardworking Americans and people in our region don't have the access to everything that's going on a constant basis. So it's our job to make sure that's produced and that it reaches them as often as possible.
And let's talk about nationally. Obviously a huge win for Donald Trump and the Republican Party, and then in Michigan he actually took, which is pretty surprising, normally a blue state in recent history. So how big of a win was Michigan for Donald Trump?
Oh, massive. I mean, it's the first time a Republican's taken it since 1988. 16 electoral votes. It was definitely a battleground state, and we saw that with the surrogates we had coming through the state. Donald J. Trump obviously made his last stop on his campaign tour here in, I believe it was Grand Rapids. We had Sarah Palin here in Alpena. We don't usually get surrogates. I think the last time was in the late 90s for George W. Bush's reelection. So it was definitely noticed, I think, among our community in the state of Michigan as far as being a battleground state and something that was going to be very important.
And talking about that, when Sarah Palin visited and spoke to 600 plus people in Alpena about why Donald Trump should be the president for our area, how big is something like that for people in the community?
Oh, massive. It gives us a little bit of a push in the final days. It re-energizes the base. And not only that, but it lets people know, especially Republicans or those who were looking at the Republican ticket, know that we were fighting for their vote and we were giving them attention, and we were trying to make sure that, again, that message reached them. So I think it was huge for our area, and we saw that even reflected at the local level.
And then the impact on independent voters in the area. If they see someone, representing a major campaign, a major presidential candidate, how important is that for them?
I think they appreciate the fact that, again, attention is focused on Northeast Michigan. Again, we're kind of tucked away in an area of the state. We're not our own peninsula. We're now a large populated area. So for people to visit us and let us know that our votes are worth them courting, I think it's huge.
And so let's talk about Donald Trump did really well in northern Michigan, Alpena County, he won by a lot, Alcona County, Presque Isle County, all those counties. Why do you think his message addresses people in this area's concerns?
I think his message was nonpartisan for the most part. It's no secret that there was a little bit of contention between the party and Donald Trump's presidency or run for the presidency early on. We tried ironing out most of those issues. But I think his message resonated with the everyday man, with independents who were just tired of the system, tired of getting the same thing over and over again. And I think they took a step back and looked at the two candidates and realized if we go with one, we're going to get business as usual and we're going to get the same stuff that we've been getting, which isn't much here in Northeast Michigan. Going with the other guy, and the guy who actually even was having issues within his own party early on again, it showed them that he's going to put the people before politics, he's going to put the people before a party, and I think that's important.
And so Alpena County, the Republicans there, you guys supported him throughout the election, handing out signs and all that. So why did you see fit? Because I know a lot of Republicans were, against his run. There was the Never Trump movement and stuff like that.
Right, and we didn't see that as heavily here in Northeast Michigan as we saw in other parts of the state. There were individuals who, again, clashed with different ideas that he carried. Obviously, there was a lot of the personal issues, his character that carried on that people didn't appreciate or like, I guess, necessarily. But I think, again, we had people coming in who'd never voted Republican picking up Trump signs. And again, they were tired of the status quo and business as usual.
And so what does that mean, having like a candidate in the Republican Party that did so well here, but not only just here, across the state? How is that important for the party in general?
I think, again, it re-energizes the party. We picked up a House seat in the Michigan House. We were expecting to lose seats. Not only did we retain our majority, but we added one to that count. Massive wins at the local levels across the state of Michigan. And again, most importantly, in the 1st District in the 106, we saw that play out very strongly.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the 1st Congressional District, where you're the Republican Committee Chairman. A huge win for Jack Bergman, who was kind of an outsider to start going through the primary process, but then really kind of got energized towards the end. Why do you think a win like that was so important? How do you think he got a win like that?
Again, I think it's people who were tired of the status quo and business as usual. They went with the outsider because they knew that with that, they'd at least get something different, and maybe somebody who would represent, again, the people and not just the party or politics as usual. Jack Bergman was very unknown in the area when he first jumped in against two very well-known candidates. And I think in the 11th hour, a lot of people trying to make those decisions looked at the advertisements, looked at the mailers coming through. There was a lot of negativity, and they went with the guy that was positive. They went with a veteran, which I think is huge in our area. And they went with a guy who, again, was carrying a new message and something a little bit different than what the other two were carrying.
And then so nationally, what do you think the next step is for the Republican Party? What do you think their main focus is going to be when everyone takes office?
I think as far as at the local level or
nationally speaking?
Nationally speaking, I think the Senate has already expressed ideas to begin the repealing of Obamacare, something that's been widely unpopular not only in the country but especially in our region. I think they're going to tackle the budget. That's going to be a huge issue. Obviously, trade's been talked about quite a bit as well, so we'll probably see them address that.
All right, we're going to take a short break, but after we're going to discuss more of the local elections, so stay tuned. We'll be right ahead. Welcome back, and thanks for joining us. I'm joined by Jesse Osmer. He's the 1st Congressional District Republican Committee Chairman. Jesse, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So we talked a little bit about the national side of the Republican wins, at least in this area, 1st Congressional and then presidency. But let's get a little more local. Speaking of which, the 106th District, big win for the Republicans and Sue Aller. So what does a win like that mean for the state and the Republican Party in Michigan?
No, it's massive. The Republican Party actually was bracing for a slight loss in the State House, and instead we added one to our fold. So I think it's going to be good for the state of Michigan because we now can retain our majority in order to push our message, continue the comeback here in Michigan, which we've seen over the past 6 years under Governor Snyder and the Republican team. Sue Aller will do a fantastic job for the area. She's going to carry on, I think, a lot of the initiatives that Representative Battaglia started. I think it's important to have that type of transition too, and to have somebody who's willing to work on the things that were started rather than scrapping it and starting all over again, which would be a loss for our region.
Right, and then let's talk a little bit about that election, because Sue Aller was down in early polls to Robert Kennedy, the Democrat candidate, and then kind of saw a surge as we got closer to Election Day. And what do you think caused that?
Again, I think we had a large amount of independent voters. We had a lot of people who were not yet making up their mind. They weren't sure how they were going to vote. We see a lot of voters who aren't maybe plugged into the party or aren't keeping track of things throughout the year make their decision usually within a week or so of Election Day. And so when we're calling through to touch base with voters, see how they feel about the election, they may express that they're undecided, they're uncommitted at that point, and then they start checking the websites out, reading the literature that's been piling up in their mail basket, going to events and hearing the message, and then making that decision usually a week or two before Election Day.
And so obviously the seat was vacated by the late Peter Battaglia, former representative. How important you think is to have a Republican fill the shoes of him?
Massively important. Again, it's somebody that's going to carry on a lot of the initiatives that he began. And I think that's big because when you have somebody who starts that job, I guess, you want somebody to be able to finish it. Unfortunately, we lost Peter way too soon. It was a massive loss for our party, as well as, personally for a lot of people in our area. I think, again, Sue's going to carry on a lot of the things that he began, and those things are very important to our issue, or our region, rather.
And then so we saw she won 62% to about 34% of the vote. It was a massive win. Is that something you expected going into it?
We expected it actually in the final weeks. We saw a surge, and we didn't expect it to be that big, but we're very grateful for the voters and for them doing the research and realizing she was the best fit.
And like you said, the Republican Party was expecting kind of a decrease maybe in the State House, and ended up being an increase. So what do you attribute that to?
I think we saw Donald Trump take Michigan. That again hasn't happened since 1988, where we've had a Republican take our state. So I think that helped a great deal. And again, the surrogates coming in. People haven't had presidential candidates and their circuits fighting up until the 11th hour in quite some time. We saw John McCain pull out very loudly in 2008. We saw Mitt Romney pull out very quietly in 2012. Donald Trump ended his his campaign rather here in Michigan. He had surrogates in almost every single day leading up to the final days of the campaign. So, that's massive for our base. It's massive for the locals. It's basically the coattails we needed.
And so even getting like hyper locally, we're talking about Alpena County commissioners. There's a few contested races this year, and the Republicans seem to be taking the majority of those races. So why do you think that surge was really felt even that locally?
You know, again, I think it's the message at the top of the ticket. Just we're done with business as usual, we're done with the status quo. A lot of our candidates, even down at the local level, they offer something new. They offer new ideas, and people are just tired of the same old policies, the same old business as usual in government, both at the local level and then all the way up to the top. So I think they were just looking for change. They wanted something that was going to kind of revitalize the area, re-energize it, give some new ideas, a new voice, and I think we got that.
And so you worked all throughout the 1st Congressional District, but tell me a little bit about what you do to get more of the local candidates' names out there as you campaign throughout the area.
Right, so we do make contributions financially to local candidates. We take out newspaper ads to help push their message. We make sure that we're canvassing doors. We are getting literature out into the community. We're making sure we prep them for events, that we're there to support them as a team. I think that's really important. You know, when you're running for office, it's a full-time job, and it can get lonely sometimes. So it's important for them to know that they have a base behind them, and that they can depend on us to be there to support them.
And as a Republican, what do you think the importance of having Republicans in even these local offices in a position of power?
You know, I think, again, it's the idea of the message we carry. We're fiscally conservative, which is massive, especially in our area where we usually start out our year with a deficit. So we have individuals who want to get in there, they want to balance the budget. They're willing to make the tough cuts where necessary. And again, you know, some of those are extremely tough. I mean, oftentimes we see a decrease in spending in areas that are quite popular in the community, but it's necessary because we can't keep going into the red over and over again.
And so what type of cuts do you think need to be made around this county?
That's a good question. It's something for them to decide. My job is to make sure they get there and that they're going in with the principles of being fiscally conservative. You know, I'll leave it to them to do the research and make the best decisions for their area.
And then even more hyper-locally, we see Nathan Skibby, who's going to take over as Alpena Township Supervisor. He went uncontested in the primaries, but then won in the race. So how do you prepare for, you know, not a primary that you're contested in, but also moving forward to the general election?
I think it's important to keep the candidates focused, to make sure they stay on message and that they understand that what they're running on, the platform they're running on, as long as they can get that to the voters, that they have an advantage. You know, again, being a Republican, I think, or a conservative rather, in our area, even if you're a Democrat, you see a lot of Democrats who are pro-life, they're pro-gun, they're fiscally conservative when they do run. But when you're running with a party that also reflects that message all the way to the top of the ticket, I think, again, that resonates with the voters and they understand that that's something that they appreciate at the local level.
So you think the values of many of the candidates, just based on their party affiliation, represents the people of Northern Michigan? I think
Northern Michigan has always elected, if they do vote Democrat, they usually vote for a blue dog Democrat. So again, that's going to be slightly more conservative.
All right, well, Jesse, thanks so much for being here. And don't go anywhere, because coming up after the break, we have even more ahead. Welcome back to another edition of Insights. I'm joined by Nathan Skibby. He's the Alpena Township Supervisor-elect. Nathan, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So probably still getting used to that title, elected on Tuesday. How does it feel?
It was a 24-hour moment of overwhelmed, but standing forth. I'm moving one day at a time and addressing the issues as they come.
So let's take a trip back. We'll take a look at the campaigning process. What was that like, and when did you decide that this is something you wanted to run for?
The campaign process was very eye-opening. You learn a lot throughout that entire time. I found it very beneficial. I got to meet a lot of our constituents, just going door to door and showing due diligence. I'm looking forward to all the things that are going to be on our agenda for the next 4 years, and to look at all of our shortcomings as potentials for growth.
And so you were born and raised in Alpena. What was the thing that made you want to run for supervisor?
Having worked at the township in a couple different positions, I was made aware of a lot of the interesting things to come. And with my education and my background, I believe that this was the right time to stand forward and make a change for positive growth for the younger generations of Alpena.
And as a Republican, you ran unopposed in the primaries. So the campaigning really started in August when the primaries kind of went and you knew you were going to be facing the Democrat Scott McKenzie. So tell me how the campaign process kind of ramped up at that point.
Well, the process most definitely did ramp up at that point because then you have an identified opponent. For myself, I was fairly gung-ho right out the gate prior to the primary, because before people become inundated with too many political commercials, it's best to gather their attention while they're not being saturated. So.
And so the Democrats obviously had 3 people running in the primary. You were alone as a Republican. Do you think that was to your advantage that you were running unopposed in your own party?
Well, it's obvious that it's always an advantage not to have anybody running against you on a ticket. I looked at it as my business stance and my principles are very Republican-based, but I'm willing to work with everybody on both sides, and I think I was really able to portray that as a positive for growth for the township. And I also feel that post-August, it got ramped up because one never knows until you're in a political race how fast that time goes. So that definitely was a time of the essence, kind of a ramping up.
And talk to me a little bit about the challenges you faced campaigning, because it's obviously a long process, you're knocking a lot of doors, stuff like that.
Really the biggest challenges that I were faced with were, for a while, it was looked as a negative for being 37 years old. Some misinformation that I had to fumble through, so to speak, to get people to see with all due clarity where I stand, where I'm from, and what direction that I would like the township to move forward in.
And you said you enjoyed campaigning. It was obviously hard work, but what was the most enjoyable part? What did you really get out of it, you think?
For myself, it was the love and hate of actually doing door-to-door, because as a lot of individuals feel, it's kind of cumbersome and invasive to be going door-to-door. I was able to work through that in terms of my own personal issues, and it gave me a great opportunity to actually meet the constituents that were going to be voting, and I think that was the biggest part that swung a lot of votes.
And then moving towards the general election, it was a pretty close race votes-wise. What do you think gave you the edge over someone like Scott McKenzie, kind of a well-known person in the township?
I would have to say what gave me the edge was my continued fight to knock door-to-door, having some of the backstories clarified by third parties, and realistically looking at he has a name, but I do as well, and as does my family, and I think that it really came down to for better or for worse, it came down to the fact that my reputation was a little bit cleaner than his is.
And in other races across the state and locally, the Republicans did really well in this area. And do you think your party affiliation with the Republican Party was something that maybe gave you that edge as well?
I wholeheartedly do believe that gave me a little bit of an edge, simply because a lot of previous seats were held by Democrats, and people have become very frustrated and tired of the lack of performance by public and civil servants. And when I joined the GOP, we had a mission, and that mission was to basically make everything red.
And so you're replacing a longtime Alpena Township Supervisor, Marie Twite, who served for over 2 decades. So what do you think you're bringing to the table as someone replacing someone that's been there for such a long time?
Marie had been there for 24 years. She's done a lot of positives and completed a lot of amazing projects for the township. I think just towards the end of her tenure, some things were just shuffled around, and it became a frustration for the taxpayers. And I believe that really she's going to be instrumental in terms of helping this transition. And what I bring forward is a youthful perspective. I'm highly educated, and I look to work with the board together and do what's best for the people of Alpena Township.
And you officially take the helm in a couple weeks. What is your main goals going forward for the township?
Well, there's many goals, but to not be overwhelmed with the amount of things that need to be addressed and changed. We're initially going to be looking internally at ourselves, whether that's through modernization of computer systems, for taxation, assessment, et cetera. We just had a wonderful meeting with a local-based company to help us move forward in that direction. There will be, beyond the modernization of computers and our systems, it will be a slow progression of one step at a time, and I think we have a wonderful board. We have two returning trustees that will be a tremendous help for a lot of the freshmen that have never been affiliated with a board or the rules and regs of how to actually properly run a board. And I have nothing but high hopes for us.
All right, well, Nathan, congratulations. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
And that will do it for this edition of Insights. Be sure to join us next week at the same time, same place for more.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.
The furniture and set design for this episode of Insights is provided by Young Appliance Art Van Furniture on US 23 South, Alpena.